Hey everybody, this is JDGaming back today with a once and done type of deal for a Metalfoes introduction. If you've been following my channel for a while, you'll know that Metalfoes are an archetype I love revisiting every format. It's because they are very consistent and yet very versatile. You have an engine that can be used to pendulum summon a variety of monsters. You're able to go ahead and play right into their strengths of making economical fusion summons, and overall it's just really consistent because they search their own key pieces and they have the pendulum monsters come back through that mechanic. So very fun strategy that works well on its own or with other archetypes you may want to play around with. But I found a lot of my deck profiles had the first like 5 to 10 minutes be exactly the same every time because for the most part that's not changing until we get something different. So at least for the time being, through Master Rule 4 and having Heavymetalfoes Electrumite down to 1 right now for the current format, I decided, you know what, let's go ahead and just explain it in one go, and then I'll reference this video as an additional supplementary kind of lesson for anyone who's completely new and wanting an introduction to Metalfoes. So without further ado, let's jump right into how this archetype works. The first thing to know about Metalfoes is that they are a pendulum archetype. So what that means is in terms of your zones, remember you have 5 spell and trap card zones, of which your left and rightmost ones currently are your scales. And so in order to do a pendulum summon, you essentially are going to need 2 different monsters. One that has a scale 1 and one that has a scale 8 in Metalfoes anyway, just a high and a low scale, and then anytime you have both of those scales, then once per turn you are allowed to, when your game state's open, kind of like the time when you'd be able to synchro, link, 𝗖𝗍𝗧, or otherwise perform an action, you're going to be able to pendulum summon. So anything in your hand that is in between these levels but does not touch those levels at all, so anything 2 through 7 in this case, from your hand or from your extra deck that's face up, you can special summon. And if you've not played pendulums before, you may be wondering, well, what the heck does that mean? Face up extra deck? Well, these pendulum monsters also have this unique mechanic in that not only are they played as spells in the scales or summoned as monsters into the monster zones, but if they'd be sent from the field to the graveyard, they're placed face up in your extra deck and stacked on top, potentially giving you more than 15 cards. And the way they work then is from there they become free monsters you could summon back to the field. And essentially before Master Rule 4 came out with link monsters and we started needing arrows for the summoning of extra monster cards, you know, cards from the extra deck, you were able to go ahead and pendulum summon everything that you sent there back. And Metalfoes were notorious for Pendulum 5, essentially much like the swinging pendulum that always comes back as it does swing away from you. You were able to go ahead and bring everything that you had sent there back to the field as long as you had the scales and the zones to do it. Nowadays, you're not able to do that, of course, unless you have a bunch of zones opened by link monsters, but that was the concept of pendulum summoning, the inevitable return of the monsters after they swing away from you, they will swing back. So how does that all tie into Metalfoes? Well, they start off with a bunch of monsters that are all scale 1 and scale 8. So here we have Metalfoes Goldriver at scale 1 and Volflame at scale 8. You can kind of see their stats: 1900 attacker, 2400 defender, and your attacker, excuse me. And you'll notice that they do have different levels. You have level 4 for Goldriver and level 7 for Volflame. And this theme basically carries over with the other 2 vanilla monsters as well. Silver is a level 3 with 1700 attack. You have Steelin at level 2 with no attack but 2100 defense. All of them are fire psychic monsters, and the fact that they're normal pendulum monsters comes into play as well because we can take advantage of that trait. They all have the exact same pendulum scale ability, and that's once per turn while they're face up on the field. That's not a hard once per turn, so it's once while it's face up on your field during your turn. You can go ahead and target any of your other face-up cards you control, destroy it, and if you do, set a Metalfoes spell or trap directly from your deck to your field. And that's really cool for a lot of reasons. First of all, you destroy your own cards, which can trigger a lot of different abilities and send cards to your extra deck if they're pendulum monsters, or to your graveyard if they would have effects to trigger or could be recurred from there later. On top of that, you're able to go ahead and search whatever key Metalfoes themed card you want from your deck directly to your field, and that dodges Thunder King Ryo, Ash Blossom, and Joyous Spring, and a lot of other annoying cards that would normally hinder consistency. You basically have, between 3 copies of all of these guys, 12 monsters that are exactly the same thing, other than attack points and their levels. So lots of consistency here, but then enough variety that you can make different plays depending on which monsters you choose to go for. And then, as if that weren't enough, we also have a copy of Metalfoes Bismugear. This is rare Metalfoes Bismugear, but it still fits into the archetype, much like Twilight Swarms are still Light Swarms. This is a level 1 monster, and back in the day, that was terrible because as a level 1, since it lines up exactly with the scale 1, you were not able to pendulum summon this guy back as part of your Pendulum 5. And that was a huge problem because whereas all these guys, every single copy you draw into and pop, you can go ahead and summon back, Bismugear didn't share that trait, and so it was actually kind of a disadvantage to play it unless you used that guy as your scale. That popped your vanillas. But nowadays, with the limitation inherently in place of how many monsters you can summon thanks to the link monsters, Bismugear no longer causes you to miss out in terms of the monsters you can pendulum back because you're probably filling the 1, 2, or 3 zones you probably have access to thanks to the link monsters and extra monster zone. So what does this card do? Well, its scale is exactly the same as these guys here. It's a scale 8, and it has the same effect in the pendulum zone as all the other guys. So basically it gives you even more consistency. Now I have 15 cards that do the same thing, and although this guy doesn't have any attack or defense points, it does say that if this card on the field from either monster or spell or trap zone is destroyed by battle or a card effect, including your own Metalfoes card, you can go ahead and during the end phase, add a Metalfoes monster from your deck to your hand, and it can even be another copy of itself. You can only use that effect of Bismugear as a hard once per turn, but that's still awesome because now again, with the restricted summoning potential for pendulum summons, this guy is still useful because 1, it adds another playset, 3 copies of your Pendulum Scale 8 that has the same effect, and then once per turn with these guys you could go ahead and recur the card you lost from the destruction, and that gives you free materials that you can use for your plays down the line, including fusion summoning during your opponent's turn. So let's jump right in to the spell and trap cards here and then discuss exactly what it is you're trying to do with this theme. So spells and traps, there are 2 of each. We'll start off with the spells here. So Metalfoes Fusion and Full Metalfoes Fusion. Metalfoes Fusion is our normal spell, and it basically is a fusion card that only works for Metalfoes Fusion monsters from your extra deck, and it has no other ability in that fusion summoning text. So it seems rather limiting, right? You're only able to summon Metalfoes monsters, but first of all, you have to remember that this thing is searchable right off of your Metalfoes cards, and as a normal spell, it can be played from its set position. On top of that, as a hard once per turn, Metalfoes Fusion can recycle itself directly into the deck for free, shuffling itself in, and then you draw a card to replace it, so it serves as a kind of upstart goblin. And if you think about the mechanics of a fusion summon, you normally take 2 monsters at least and 1 fusion spell, and then it becomes 3 cards for 1, which is even worse than a Synchro or Xyz summon or a Link summon. So in terms of card advantage, this was never a good mechanic, right? Unless you could have some way to recoup that loss, or it was really worth summoning the monster, which it rarely was. But with Metalfoes Fusion, you can go and recycle that fusion spell, essentially meaning if you have 2 monsters, you're able to go ahead and make your play, and that's very reminiscent of a Synchro summon, Xyz summon, Link summon, and don't forget, the free draw that you get as part of this actually can help improve your game state by giving you another fresh card that could turn the tables even further. So Metalfoes Fusion is awesome for that. And you have Full Metalfoes Fusion, which is a quick play spell. Again, it just lets you fusion summon for Metalfoes Fusions, and it has no recycling effect. But the fact that it's a quick play means now you can use this as kind of a pseudo trap card, allowing you to go and fusion summon during your opponent's turn, and there are some good fusion monsters that will help you take advantage of that effect. As if that weren't enough, don't forget a quick play fusion spell like Super Poly, 𝗖𝗍𝗓𝗏 Fusion. Those types of cards basically have the advantage of if you draw them, you can go ahead and activate them from your hand as kind of a battle trick or a way of dodging your opponent's cards, and Full Metalfoes Fusion is able to do all that. It's just if you happen to search it with your Metalfoes cards, which you usually do, don't forget it can't be activated the same turn it's set. You'll have to be setting Metalfoes Fusion for that because quick play spells, once set, can't be activated that same turn, much like normal trap cards. So just keep that one aspect in mind, and Full Metalfoes Fusion will add another dimension to your strategy. Then the last 2 cards are our traps. We have one of each of these guys. So we have a normal Metalfoes counter and a continuous Metalfoes combination. So counter is our normal trap here. If a card or cards you control is destroyed by battle or card effect for any reason by either player, including your own Metalfoes, you could special summon a Metalfoes monster from your deck to replace it. So that's already awesome in that you're able to strengthen your board if your opponent destroys your guys. Maybe it's a 𝗪𝗫𝗍𝗓 that got killed, and now you can recur a monster during the end phase and have one immediately to shield you, like the 2400 attack Volflame. Not bad at all, right? On top of that, you can combo it during your own turn, killing your own cards for a part of your own plays, and then now you get a free monster on the field that you can fuse with the Metalfoes Fusion you just put into play. So very powerful card right there, but then it has an additional ability. During either player's turn, except the one it was just sent to the graveyard, you could go ahead and banish it from the graveyard in order to take one of your Metalfoes Pendulum monsters from your extra deck that's face up and add it to your hand. So this means over 2 turns, it gives you 2 cards to replace the ones that you lost and itself, which makes it a very powerful card in this strategy. You just play the 1 copy of this just like the fusions because you're able to search whichever one you want, and as we'll get to later, they end up all being recyclable. Then we have full Metalfoes combination, which is a continuous trap, and it says once per turn if a fusion monster is summoned by either player through fusion summon, you can go and target one of your Metalfoes monsters, whether they're a fusion, pendulum, whatever type. If it's a Metalfoes monster in your graveyard with a lower level than the summoned fusion monster, you could special summon it, which is really cool because as we'll see here, there's kind of a ladder to the different levels of the fusion monsters, and you can go ahead and bring any of the lower level guys back out when you fusion summon a higher level guy. And that doesn't even consider your opponent playing a fusion based strategy or teching an instant fusion. You could get a free monster through that as well. Then it has a second ability as well. If this card on the field is sent from the field to the graveyard through any means, destruction or whatever, you can go ahead and add a Metalfoes monster directly from your deck to your hand to replace it, and that's cool for a couple reasons. We can go ahead and activate this thing, maybe fuse during our opponent's turn with full Metalfoes Fusion, and that would let us recur a monster, but then we can go ahead and during our own turn pop it with a Metalfoes scale effect, and then immediately search another card, essentially turning it into a reinforcement of the army or Rhoda type of effect. And it can combo with some other cards that we like teching in Metalfoes as well. So that is a quick introduction to the Metalfoes monsters and then to the spells and traps. And now one last thing I like to talk about as part of the core for Metalfoes in the main deck is Painful Decision. Usually I like running 2 copies of this. It's a normal spell that reads, send a level 4 or lower normal monster from your deck to the graveyard, and if you do, add another card of the same name from that card from your deck to your hand. And you can only activate one of these per turn, so it is a hard once per turn. That's why we play 2 copies and not 3, but mathematically speaking, let's say you're going second, right? So you have the full 6 cards given to you. If you're playing 3 copies of a card, the chance of you drawing 2 or more of them is a measly 5% rounded. So like, it's nothing. It's gonna happen in 1 in every 20 games. If you play a full event, it'll happen like 1, maybe 2 times. Not the biggest thing to worry about now, is it? But it's extremely powerful when you draw it because you can go ahead and fetch whatever scale or level you would like except for Volflame and 𝗪𝗫𝗍𝗓, and that gives you a lot of flexibility, so this card ends up being really worth it. Play the 2 copies and your chance of drawing both of them is down to like 1.9%. It's minuscule. Like that is what 1 in every 50 games, 2 in 100. Like it's not going to happen to a significant degree. You really don't care about that. But you do go up by playing 2 copies of this thing up to about 28% of time you'll open it versus only 15% of the time, which if you think about it quickly, you double your chances of seeing it, roughly, makes sense. But you're not really caring about the chance of double drawing this because it's only a 2% chance. So realistically, 2 copies of this helps round out your core here. So you start off with 15 Metalfoes monsters, and then you have a Painful Decision pair, and then that helps add to your consistency even further because you have 17 now of the same cards, and 2 of them blank for whatever cards you would like, as a Joker would. Then we're talking about the fusions here. So 𝗖𝗪𝗧𝗏, full Metalfoes 𝗖𝗪𝗧𝗏 is our main defensive monster. Fitting with its name, it does work nicely with full Metalfoes Fusion. So this level 1 Psychic Fusion monster is very reminiscent of... So now it's time to talk about the fusion monsters, and we're starting off with the lowest level here and climbing our way up. Full Metalfoes 𝗖𝗪𝗧𝗏 is a level 1 that's very reminiscent of 𝗀 Restrict. As its name suggests, full Metalfoes 𝗖𝗪𝗧𝗏 works nicely with full Metalfoes Fusion. And this guy, for its materials, needs a Metalfoes monster plus a normal monster, which you just saw is like most of your main core. has no attack and defense, but that's not a problem because although this guy must be fusion summoned, which is unfortunate, you can't bring the level 1 guy for free back to your field through Metalfoes combination. Darn, it would have been way too OP because once per turn during your opponent's turn, you can target one of their effect monsters on the field and equip it to this guy. Then this guy's defense gets boosted by the combined attack of all monsters equipped to it. And the fact that it steals attack points into its own defense points means you're able to go and steal link monsters and they still work as well. So the card's fortunately going to work through the link era as well. The fact that you're able to steal your opponent's effect monster at any point that it exists on the field is pretty annoying because now you can take your opponent's key combo pieces before they can do anything with them. As if that's not enough, if you steal a decent boss monster, you now have a strong defender on your side of the field. And if this guy sticks around until your next turn, its other ability is that you're allowed to use a fusion monster, or rather you're allowed to use the monsters you've stolen from your opponent and equip to this guy as fusion materials for the fusion summon of a Metalfoes monster. And that's where our copy of Metalfoes 𝗖𝗎𝗓𝗡𝗘 comes in. This guy is basically a vanilla. It's a 2500 attacker and defender that needs a Metalfoes monster and any one monster with 2500 or less attack, which you're often stealing from your opponent with 𝗖𝗎𝗓𝗃. So this basically being in here at 1 each lets you go and steal your opponent's monster during their turn as kind of a pseudo trap card, and then if that monster survives, you can go ahead and turn it into 𝗖𝗎𝗓𝗡𝗘 next turn by searching a Metalfoes Fusion, which then gives you a free 25 beater to add on to everything else you have, and then hopefully that will help you clear out the game right there. So that's the whole point of that. It's also interesting to know 𝗖𝗎𝗓𝗡𝗘 is a level 5, so you theoretically you could play Instant Fusion or some other cards with it in order to go for plays. 𝗖𝗎𝗓𝗃 is also a level 1 that can be fusion summoned, so even though you can't use its steal effect during your own turn, you could tech Instant Fusion in this strategy as well, and maybe go for like a 𝗪𝗓𝗓𝗓 or something if that's what you want to do. Lots of options exist for this deck. Then we end up playing the only 3 of for our Metalfoes Fusion monsters, and that is Metalfoes Mithrilium. This is a level 6 monster with 2600 attack, which is, you know, quite bulky for a level 6 monster. Of course, levels don't matter quite as much in the game right now as they once did, but it's still a powerful card nonetheless. 1 Metalfoes monster plus 1 Pendulum monster gets you this guy, which you saw is literally every Metalfoes, and as long as we stick to adding mainly Pendulum monsters for the rest of our main deck, we'll be able to summon this card with ease. Its effect is you can target 2 of your Metalfoes cards in your graveyard along with 1 card on the field, either side, face up, face down, doesn't matter. You shuffle your 2 Metalfoes cards from your graveyard back into the deck, recycling them for later, and if you do, return the target on the field to the hand. No destruction. Yeah, you target, but you can get rid of your opponent's big threats, break apart their board, soften their state, and then you can go ahead and go in for the kill, which is very powerful of this card. But don't forget, it's able to target your own cards, so you can reuse your once per turn Metalfoes scale effects because those aren't hard once per turn, so they're just one time while they're on the field. You can go ahead and, like back in the day, target a floodgate of your own, like a Vanity's Emptiness from back in the day, and go ahead and bounce that back to your hand, turning it off for the turn, and then you can go ahead and put it back onto the field to lock out your opponent during their side, making it essentially a one-sided version of whatever it was. So this card is insanely powerful for both of those effects there. And as if that weren't enough, that's the only hard once per turn on Metalfoes Mithrilium. It has another ability, and it's every time a copy of it is sent from the field to the graveyard. If that happens, so it can't even miss timing, you're able to go ahead and float directly into a Metalfoes Pendulum monster that's either face up in your extra deck or in your graveyard already. And so you're able to go ahead and replace this guy whenever you make a fusion summon or a link summon. So then we go back to our idea, right? So Metalfoes Fusion replaces itself, and now you're able to go ahead and replace one of the monsters when you get rid of your Mithrilium. It's kind of like you pay a loan and then, you know, you get it paid back. You're ending up basically making fusions for 1 card, which is what makes this card awesome, especially because then it goes and recycles your cards like your fusion or whatever, and then you could go ahead and get rid of an opponent's card to essentially cancel out the 1 card you put into Mithrilium in the first place. So Mithrilium is really powerful. Usually you want 3 copies because if you go for a Mithrilium and then turn it into another Mithrilium, the first one floats, giving you materials, and then you're able to go ahead and use it for other plays, maybe even going to your 3rd Mithrilium, but, you know, the world's your oyster here. You have a lot of options. Having the 3rd copy basically makes it so even if your opponent hits you with a Ghost Ogre and Snow Rabbit or a Solemn Strike, which would be, you know, the worst case scenario on this effect, you're able to at least go ahead and have the peace of mind that you can go for another Mithrilium, recycle the other 2, and you'll basically never run out. 2 is a doable number, but it is a bit risky. 3 basically makes it so you never have to worry about the quantities remaining in your deck, and so I strongly urge you guys to go ahead and consider playing 3 copies of this whenever possible. And then the last card here that I'm going to talk about is going to be Metalfoes 𝗖𝗢𝗡𝗘𝗖𝗧. There technically is Metalfoes Crimsonite, which is just a 3000 attack, level 9 version of our Adamante. You need 2 monsters that are 3000 attack or less, so basically it increases the cap of what you're able to steal from your opponent with Alcahest and still turn into a fusion. I don't think it's worth playing in most situations though. The meta may change, which makes that viable, but taking 2 of your opponent's cards over 2 turns, takes a while, and so Alcahest is usually useful for just stealing one of their small combo pieces or link monsters, and then being able to turn that into an Adamante the next turn. It's a bit too resource intensive to have to take 2 of your own cards, thanks to Crimsonite requiring the 2 additional monsters in addition to your Metalfoes. So that's the quick comment on that. 𝗖𝗢𝗡𝗘𝗖𝗧 is a level 8 monster, so now you can see this guy being level 8 means now you can fuse with Metalfoes combination up and bring 𝗪𝗏𝗡 back to the field, and 𝗪𝗏𝗡 just floated, and that's awesome because now you could take 𝗪𝗏𝗡 and the floated monster into another monster, and 𝗪𝗏𝗡 floats yet again. So that's where the insanity comes in, guys. You're able to recycle these floating monsters that give you even more monsters, and 𝗖𝗢𝗡𝗘 itself is worth playing, unlike Crimsonite. So you just need 2 Metalfoes monsters, very easy to do here. 2800 attack, 2200 defense, and its first effect is when any of your Metalfoes, whether it's itself or any of your other guys it's supporting, would attack a defense position monster your opponent has, you inflict double piercing damage to your opponent, much like Blue Eyes Chaos Max Dragon, which makes cards like Enemy Controller a very interesting tech choice in this strategy, not only because you have free Pendulum monsters that you contribute for the steal effect of Enemy Controller, but even switching battle positions to protect your board can be very powerful when you could follow up with an 𝗖𝗢𝗡𝗘𝗖𝗧 in order to destroy your opponent's life points at twice the speed. Then the second ability is, if this card is sent from the field to the graveyard, again for any reason, your own pop effect, use it as a material for something, whatever, you can go and target any one card on the field and destroy it, which helps you clear your opponent's field, combo off your own cards, etc. This card's very flexible, and so you gotta remember that this boss monster does exist. If your opponent's playing Scapegoat, that's actually a huge liability for them a lot of times, because not only are you able to put that card and force it into play with like a 𝗪𝗏𝗡 that targets it and says, you either play that Scapegoat now or it's gone for the turn and you can't protect yourself. Well, if they do flip it because they're not familiar with Metalfoes, you go and summon 𝗖𝗢𝗡𝗘𝗖𝗧 and attack for 5600 damage through one of the tokens out of nowhere. So very powerful card all around, and it fits nicely into the theme and adds in terms of what you're able to do with combination. And the last card we're going to be talking about here in the last section is going to be Heavymetalfoes Electrumite, going into our tech choices, because this is what really brings the theme together. This is another fire psychic monster, but it's a link monster that needs 2 pendulum monsters to summon. Very easy to do, considering that's literally the materials that you use for all of your summons, and pendulum summoning will help you accomplish that goal quite nicely. It has 3 mighty effects, in addition to its pretty solid 1800 attack for a Link 2 monster. Its first effect is, if this card is Link summoned, you can take any pendulum monster from your deck, regardless of what archetype it belongs to or whatever, and just put it in your extra deck face up. That's really cool, because that means now I can go ahead and pendulum summon anything I want directly from my deck through a couple steps here. So very powerful in its ability to tutor whatever we want. That's not limited to once per turn as well, which means every time we can recycle this card becomes powerful, which is part of the reason why this went down to 1 from its 3 copies from Pendulum Magicians and all that. Then it has a second ability. Once per turn, much like every other Metalfoes monster, you can target another face-up card you control and destroy it. But then instead of adding a spell or trap from your deck to your field, you can then take a Pendulum monster that's in your extra deck face-up and add it to your hand. That could be the card you just put there, essentially making it 2 steps to get any card from your deck to your hand, or it could be a card that you already had there that you may want to reuse. So very powerful pair of effects right there. And again, that's not once per turn. Then the final effect is kind of a joke, because this is the only one that's a hard once per turn on this card, and it's that if you happen to have popped your spell or trap, your scales for this ability, and a card leaves your pendulum scale, you're able to go ahead and add that card, or draw 1 card. So can't actually be a trap, I misspoke there. Essentially, if you kill your scale and it leaves, you're able to go and draw. And that's during either turn. So it could even be during your opponent's turn if they try to do something fishy, break up your scales or something while you still have this guy. You draw a card to replace it, which is awesome. And of course, basically this comes in a full package where you summon this guy, take something from your extra into your from your main into your extra, then you get to add that to your hand, and you draw 1 because you killed a scale that you had. So very powerful card. It is recyclable with Metalfoes Mithrilium, which means now you have Heavymetalfoes Electrumite first being summoned, and then you Mithrilium it back, and now you can summon it again after a Pendulum Summon. So very powerful effect there, and there are some other ways that we can bring it out as well, such as 𝗖𝗎𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓. So this is a Link 2 that's just the fire attribute guy. You need 2 fire monsters, starts with 1400 attack, boosts all your fire guys including itself by 500 attack and defense, also decreases the attack and defense of all water monsters by 400. So the fact that you have a Pendulum deck that special summons multiple guys from the extra deck, hand, and from the fusions, you know, all that stuff, means Little Chimera does a lot of boosting to your field. 500 per monster means if you have a field of 4 monsters, which is very reasonable in this deck, you're suddenly gaining 2000 attack out of nowhere, and that's like a 5th monster, which can easily make it so you win the game when you're clearing your opponent's field with cards like Mithrilium. Then, if this card dies in battle or by card effect and is sent to your graveyard, even by your Metalfoes effect, remember, you're able to go ahead and recycle a fire monster directly from your grave to hand. That could be recycling this guy, could be adding a scale of your choice back to your hand, and it can even be recycling the Heavymetalfoes Electrumite again, which means between this card and the Mithrilium and the 1 copy we're allowed, Metalfoes are indeed allowed to play 3 copies of Heavymetalfoes Electrumite, which I think is fair considering it's actually a card that originated for this theme. So 𝗖𝗎𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓 is nice in its flexibility, has the same arrows, giving you more zones. You're able to go ahead and power up everything, and of course recycle your key cards including Electrumite. So I love that. And then the last 3 main deck cards I like talking about are these. So first of all, when you want to summon your Heavymetalfoes Electrumite, it becomes important to remember, okay, how do I get 2 Pendulum monsters onto the field? You could Pendulum Summon, I suppose, but ideally you'd wait until you have these 2 arrows and you can bring 2 more monsters from your extra deck that you used as materials for this guy, in addition to everything you already have in your hand. So the best ways I found to do that are Rescue Hamster and Rescue Rabbit. I'll talk about Rabbit first because everyone's familiar with this guy from Dino Rabbit days. Level 4 Earth, 300 attack, 100 defense is the same between the 2, and they're both beasts. Rescue Rabbit's not a Pendulum monster, it's just an effect monster, and it says cannot be special summoned from the deck, but you could Pendulum summon it from your hand. So in a case where you have Rescue Rabbit, you may have enough resources that it's actually worth bringing this guy out through that method, or you can just normal it, your choice. You can banish this guy when it's face up on your field in order to special summon 2 level 4 or lower normal monsters with the same name from your deck, but they're destroyed in the end phase, and that's not really an issue to you because you're going to use them for a Metalfoes Electrumite play anyway immediately. You can only use this effective Rescue Rabbit once per turn, but it's a solid 3 of because this card basically means a single normal summon or free Pendulum summon lets you go into Electrumite with no other cards, and that's nuts because then this card will get you another free card in the process of its 3 effects. So really powerful there. And then Hamster is very similar. It does kind of the same thing, but then adds to it as if it weren't you know, good enough already to be Rescue Rabbit. So Rescue Hamster has 2 abilities because he is a scale effect and he has a monster effect. So the monster effect is during the turn this was normal summon, so that one forces you to make that play. If you already have a face-up level 5 or lower Pendulum monster in your extra deck face up, whether or not it is an effect monster, it doesn't matter. So even 𝗪𝗫𝗍 counts for this, unlike, you know, Rescue Rabbit basically hitting the same targets as your Painful Decision. Rescue Hamster can let you summon 2 copies of that same Pendulum monster card from your deck that match that card's name. And those are 2 Pendulum monsters, which means you can take those and turn them into Heavymetalfoes Electrumite as well. You can have the same restrictions essentially. Their effects are negated, essentially turning them into vanillas, and they are destroyed during the end phase, but it lets you go for your Heavymetalfoes Electrumite play. And if you were to get out, let's say, 2 copies of 𝗪𝗫𝗍, you could go ahead and pop one of them, and it doesn't matter because you're able to go ahead and use its effect from having left the field and being destroyed. It's no longer negated by the Rescue Hamster. Then once it ends up in the extra deck, whether you searched it there or it got its own effect to, you know, tribute itself and send itself to the extra deck, Rescue Hamster has another ability when you're able to recover it with the Electrumite and then scale it. So 5 isn't the best scale, but it's not the worst scale in this deck. You could still Pendulum summon your weak guys or your strong guys using this card. And then it says you can banish this card from your Pendulum zone as a hard once per duel in order to recover 2 of your Pendulum monsters that are face up in your extra deck with the same exact name to your hand. They can be normal monsters, they can be effect monsters, it doesn't matter. You're able to recur 2 of them. So now, if you hard draw into your Rescue Hamster, you not only get to essentially Rescue Rabbit to the field 2 guys for an Electrumite, but that will then let you recover the hamster, and the hamster goes back to the field where it is able to go ahead and banish itself, and then you recover 2 more monsters. So it basically gives you 4 monsters for absolutely no reason. This card is nuts, and it's a definite 3 of it. Even if you're not playing Rescue Rabbit, this card is awesome to search off of the Electrumite, and it is strongly encouraged to play the 3 copies of this guy. At the very least, play one so you can search it off of the Electrumite. And then the last card I like playing, usually in triplicate as well, is Archfiend Eccentric. This guy is very flexible in that it's a pendulum monster. You'll find when you play this deck that any decent or halfway decent pendulum monster is useful thanks to Mithrilium being, you know, a monster that needs it as fusion material, and Electrumite being something that you could just go and link summon into. Archfiend Eccentric is a level 3 with 800 attack, 1000 defense, so very paltry stats. Light Fiend doesn't really help you in the strategy or doesn't hurt you or anything either, but it has 2 really powerful abilities. As a monster, you could tribute this card, which sends it face up to your extra deck for resummoning or re-adding or whatever, and then target a monster on the field on either side. Destroy it, and you can only use that effect once per turn, just so you can't pop Pendulum Pop. You know, that'd be, you know, a bit annoying. Not necessarily broken these days, but it'd be kind of annoying to have to deal with a double pop every single turn. But that is like Exiled Force. It's able to get rid of some of your opponent's key cards, and that's really awesome. But on top of that, its scale effect, on top of being a level 7 or a scale 7, which lets you go for most of your monsters anywho, you're able to go ahead and target one other spell or trap on the field. Could be your opponent's Floodgate, could be their back row, could be their Pendulum Scale, or could be your own cards. Destroy it, and this card together with it. You can only use that effect of Archfiend Eccentric once per turn. But notice, first of all, between the 2 effects, each of them are restricted to once per turn, but I could go ahead, scale, pop it, and then pendulum it back and pop a monster, getting rid of 2 of my opponent's cards for 1, which makes this a very value beneficial card. It's a very cost-effective card. On top of that, you can kill your own card. So remember Metalfoes combination, you could set this directly from your deck to your field using a Metalfoes card, pop this using this, these 2 go away, but in exchange you now have any of your Metalfoes monsters, so you can scale 1 or 8, whatever you need to complete your combo, pendulum summon off, and then probably go for Electrumite if you haven't already. So these cards work quite nicely in tandem, turning combination into a Rhoda for your deck you can access at any time if you have another Metalfoes monster and something to pop. So Eccentric I like playing 3 of because it works proactively for this combo, and if I'm going second, it helps me dismantle my opponent's board so that I'm able to go into a game-winning push right off the bat. So that's it for now, guys. This is basically a quick introduction showing you guys what Metalfoes are able to do. They're very aggressive, very consistent, and they have a lot of tricks up their sleeves that allow them to go ahead and combine with other strategies. So go ahead and let me know what you think about this theme down below, and don't forget to check out some of my Metalfoes deck profiles where I put these theories into practice in some really interesting ideas. So that's the end of this video, but there's plenty more where it came from. I invite you to explore the playlists on screen to see what else I have to offer, and if you really liked what you saw today, consider subscribing to JDGaming for more Yu-Gi-Oh videos. Thanks guys, this is JDGaming, hope you guys enjoyed as always, and I'll see you guys next time.